Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to talk about something I'm going to call fake intelligence. Because I think it's upon us where we need to understand what is intelligence and what is not intelligence. We simply have to do it. What's interesting is I've generally been awake since 2003. But it took me all of this time, 15 years or so, to really see this absolutely as clear as a bell. The difference between what I would call intelligence and what we might call being smart. I think it's two different things. And so I've been putting a lot of thought into this, and I think it's important that we as individuals understand the difference of the two, and that we spread this method to other people so that we can all be in a room and understand who is smart or capable of being smart, which I'm going to classify as a person who can memorize and repeat. People on Jeopardy who win are smart, but they have not usually proven that they're intelligent. Right? You memorize and repeat a bunch of bullshit. Okay, hey, that's got its value, right? Doctors must memorize and use that knowledge of how the body works to heal us when we got a bullet wound or we're sick, and they memorize that big pharmaceutical table in their brain, most of which is complete bullshit, but whatever. Firefighters have to remember how to put out your house, right? Etc., etc. So what is intelligence? Everyone should have their own form of intelligence, but I would say intelligence is your ability to make deductions, to look at information and pioneer into the void what doesn't exist yet, to discover things. It is where we as a species go to the next step, go to the next level. It's where we preserve our species in this gigantic universe, whatever the hell it is, right? Now, we can have smart people by themselves as long as they don't bullshit themselves and get stuck up in mass media products, false narratives, because they have been made intelligent falsely in the eyes of friends and family and the population by memorizing and repeating. It's funny, I lived in the Bay Area for about 12 years, and there was someone at a friend of mine's work who was on Jeopardy. It did really well. And they talked about how they prepared for Jeopardy, and it was reading and memorizing and reading and memorizing all of the things that typically come up as categories on Jeopardy. Alec Trebek is extremely snooty about his ability to memorize and repeat. Now, perhaps he's intelligent, but I have not seen him do anything that would signify that he's intelligent, right? He's smart. Supposedly he speaks 7 different languages. All right. Great. You've memorized and repeated how to communicate, which is awesome. It's an awesome thing. It's not a negative thing that someone is smart. It's just we also need everyone to be intelligent. Now, here's the interesting thing. You could get on Jeopardy and be unable to answer a single question without the other 2 contestants. And the public would say, my God, that person is dumb. But you go home, and because you're intelligent, you're doing all kinds of stuff at your house, all kinds of stuff at your job that is absolutely beyond brilliant. Beyond brilliant. And this is where you get a lot of sort of, recluse, nerds, maybe even sociopaths. 2 different things. You could be both if you want. If you accidentally get caught up in some punishment for being different in this world. But you're a certifiable genius. You're what the world really needs at the helm of the ship that is the human species. But because you don't know the capital of Minnesota, society might frown on your ability to do so. How is the world structured today? Well, 150 years ago, the average education went up to about 8th grade, and you stopped. And we had invention after invention popping out of everything. We had, all kinds of farming inventions from people with no degrees. People made cars, they made railroads, engines, all kinds of stuff with just an 8th grade education. Because they were intelligent. They knew the cause and effect of combustion engines, fuel, air, mixtures, fire, spark plugs, blah, blah, blah. They understood how to build an oven. They looked at clay ovens, then they started looking at metal ovens, and they started looking at how metal absorbs heat and distributes it around a pizza. Didn't necessarily have to have a degree. But how is society trained today? Well, in a lot of areas of the world where it doesn't really matter, they want you to have a degree. They want to know, and this isn't necessarily the employer's fault because they have been indoctrinated and built up from people that went through the process themselves. And I'm not saying getting a degree is a bad thing. If you don't get it in something that's going to imbue you with intelligence, then what were you doing? Because if memorizing and repeating is all you need to do to get your job, go buy a book, memorize and repeat it, and go get your job. You don't need to lose $100,000 in some crappy student loan system, right? But you have to have this degree in a lot of different places. Again, where I live and the sectors that I work in, degrees are maybe 50-50 because they know they need intelligence from folks like myself. And the more we are self-educated and can pioneer and invent, they're like, well, get that guy. That guy makes product. What do we sell? Product. We can build services around the product once it exists. Once you build a motor inside your head that is intelligence, then you are nonstop inventing new things and new ways to do things because you'll find out that your endorphins and all your dopamine is driven by this process of inventing. No matter how smart you are, unless you're Cliff Clavin, which is this fictional character in the epic sitcom in America called Cheers, who everyone frowned upon, right? The guy had a memorizing and repeating brain. He was smart. And so he would sit there and, cough up all this stuff. And, of course, they littered his facts with a lot of untruths that were very funny. But he was the guy who couldn't get a girl because all he was doing is enamoring people with his smartness, his fake intelligence. I don't know what the ratio is between smart and intelligent, as I've defined it being smart being memorizing, repeating, and intelligence being deducing and inventing method. I think it's extremely handy to have all of the claims of the world in a particular area memorized, and then you start to pick it apart. You start to experiment. I've mentioned Bruce Lipton on this show several times. He's a great read. He's a great listen. He went to medical school. He was a prodigy child. Everything he learned in school, he took into the laboratory. So he had his memorizing and repeating smart stuff in the books. Then he would go into the laboratory and find out, holy shit, this is untrue. Or I'm having a problem taking what I've learned in this memorize and repeat realm and getting it to work in the real world. So maybe I've got it wrong. But eventually, because of his incredible intelligence, was able to prove that a bunch of what he had learned, one of which was called the dogma theory, unbelievable how in your face it is, right? That it wasn't true. The way the human cell worked was completely documented incorrectly. All right. But he took his findings to his tenure professors that kicked him out, like I said several times. He had to go teach in Guam. He then went and studied epigenetics and became probably one of the foremost authorities on the subject. We are now in a hostile situation in this country whereby we have the deep state taking advantage of all the quote-unquote smart people to shove more memorizing and repeating factoids that are absolutely incorrect into their minds so that they believe compassionately and passionately about the wrong things. There's no cause and effect models in their brain. There's very little history in their brain. And because they are apt to believe anything that they read or be told by certain products of the mainstream media, whether it be a magazine, television, or internet, or college, they immediately adopt things that are not true. And then they stomp around the world, starting fires, ruining countries, ruining cultures, causing war, while the intelligent people are researching everything. They're experimenting. They're trying to confirm that what they're being told actually works. Now, there's obviously a group of folks that are older. Very few of them are awake. For the ones that are awake, that are baby boomers, they get double stars on their scorecards because they have had to fight through more indoctrination than any one of us down here in the Gen X or lower realm who have had a really bad run of life because the bankers have constantly boom and busted our worlds out of all success realms. I have counted on my own history at least 3 opportunities I had to be a multi-millionaire They were destroyed by the bankers creating these scandals, these fake recessions. As I got older, the opportunities got bigger, and the losses got bigger, right? But it's fueled because the world believes all of the explanations of the scam. No one's willing to pay attention to history. If you memorize and repeat, then you'll find that you do not have a very developed linear mind. You will not have history all in one big picture inside your mind. It can be likened to a game of chess. You're going to hear me use this analogy probably a lot in Season 4 because I think it's a very powerful analogy. One, Jeopardy is a great way of separating memorizers and repeaters from true thinkers. It's great. Again, go download or get the Mensa, M-E-N-S-A, test to see if you can get into their group. You don't worry about getting into their group, but you want to take the test because it will teach you whether or not you're intelligent. And there aren't any capital city questions and bullshit from Jeopardy. It's real thinking. But how do you win at chess? First, you have to be able to memorize the rules. Well, a smart person can memorize the rules, right? A smart person memorizes a bunch of legacy, legendary plays. They have games memorized in their heads because they're trying to win this on a mathematical basis, just like Big Blue beat the Russian guy. The Russian guy was intelligent. I'm sure he has the moves memorized as well. The moves at the end of the movie Blade Runner are very famous moves from a very famous game. But an intelligent person will be a person who can defeat this brute force artificial intelligence that is simply playing back old plays, using mathematics to think way ahead and counteract any move that you make, such that it wins and you lose, right? What was the big fictional attribute of the fictional character James T. Kirk? If you watched all the movies and watched all the series on TV, you'll find that James T. Kirk, at one point in his life, was given a test by the Starfleet Academy. It's a very important test. The test was designed to fail, to test a person under pressure, failing, losing their crew, losing their ship, failing, and to see how they reacted under pressure. But James T. Kirk was different. He won. He beat the system because he thought instead of memorized and repeated. He used method of his intelligence to win. And even though that's a fictional scenario, that has happened countless times in world history, I assure you. I'll give you a real-world example. I may have given this once in the 300-plus episodes, so if you heard this before, then you get the trophy for having listened to a lot of episodes. I worked Electronic Arts. We owned the company Origin, which now runs Electronic Arts. But Origin was famous for making a game called Ultima Online, built off of the Ultima game that had been around since the 80s. We were the first MMO in the world. And the game went on for a couple of years. And we're having a problem coming up with new content. And the folks at Origin came up with a brilliant idea to overwhelm a city with invasion from the NPCs, the non-player characters, the characters that the computer controlled. We're going to overwhelm the city and run all the humans out of the city. And we have what was called shard servers. They're servers that are distributed all over the world. So how every MMO works. Even ones on your telephone do this now. Well, in every single scenario, the zombies, or the bad guys, they weren't zombies, but the undead, were running everyone out of the city. Successfully. It was great. Until we got to Japan. First thing that happened was the Japanese put up an amazing fight. The fight lasted a hell of a lot longer than all the other servers. But then they did something unprecedented, using intelligence. Okay? They regrouped out in the forest, brought everything together. They strategized. And they went back in and they took the fucking city back. We're sitting there watching this with our jaws on the ground. The amount of forces that we dumped into the city were overwhelming. It should have been mathematically impossible for them to win. But they went back in the city and took the place back over. Eventually, Electronic Arts had to swoop in, and Origin had to swoop in and tell the folks, hey, amazing job, but we have to get you in sync with all the other servers. So we're gonna log you out, and we're gonna log you back in, and you're not going to be in the city, and this scenario will have taken place. But you guys did something that no one else was able to do. You won. They won because they used their brains. That's the power of intelligence versus being smart. Sure, they used their memorizing and repeating of the rules and how, weapons worked and how the statistics work on the various characters, but they strategized to win. That's what we have to be to get out of this deep state push to destroy America so that it can be taken over by the deep state that is already overwhelmingly controlling pretty much every country in this planet except for maybe Russia and China. I know that just went very political. But that's the practical application and the practical need that we're in now that has to take place. Now, the beautiful thing is if you can survey everyone in your life who is debating something, and provided that you start to do your own research, which is virtually everyone who watches this show, unless you're a newcomer, you will know the difference between the two. Because every single human being has done something intelligent in their lifetime. I'm willing to bet every human being does something intelligent every single day. At least some microscopic thing, even if they're 99% a memorizer and repeater. Now, at some point, there's going to be a ratio between the two in your brain. You do need at least all of the claims of facts in this world so that you can survey them and connect them and make deductions and see if anything is really true. I think it goes without saying, hopefully, but let me say it on point. The more intelligent you become, the more you rule your destiny. 100%. You enjoy life better. Very few things can throw you for a loop because you can think. And even when something does try to take you down, when you're going down but you know you're intelligent, you might be like, okay, I'm in a bit of a free fall here. I didn't know this was coming. This is something new to me. Wasn't in the book of memorizing and repeating. But now I'm going to get creative. Now I'm going to use my mind to defeat what is trying to defeat me, whether it be an actual organization, an individual, or it's just life flipped around and caught you off guard. Now, for the baby boomers, they were sitting in a realm where life was prosperous, at least in the United States of America, and I think most of the world, or the first world, right? So you followed the rules and things typically worked out pretty well. The deep state was still forming around this country, right? Infiltrating the government and infiltrating the military. Now, most of the wars that we have fought, except the Revolutionary War, were bullshit wars. 1812 was very real. If you look at the Civil War as a deep state war, you'll understand that war a lot better. I recently heard last night from a friend of mine that a famous historian, of which he couldn't remember the name, said that during the Civil War, the wrong side won. That's a big claim. It takes a lot more knowledge than I have to really parse that out. But I think that it was a war that no matter what side won, you either had slavery and a bunch of oligarchs running the plantations, or you had the bankers, the Yankees, up above, taking over the actual financial sensibilities of the country, which is why Lincoln was eventually murdered for creating the greenback outside of European control, outside of Rothschild control. World War I, well, they wanted you to believe that a guy named Franz Ferdinand, who had a murder attempt on his life, drove and dropped off his wife, then drove back to the place where he was murdered and got murdered when he knew someone was trying to kill him in the first place, that the whole world gave so much of a shit that they started a world war over this guy's death because of allies and all these treaties and crap. Complete bullshit. 16th Amendment was passed in the United States and they wanted a war. They wanted us to borrow money. We were xenophobes and we stayed out of it until the last year. We only think we're in there for 11 months and then we're out. The Roaring Twenties, like I've always said, robbed all of the people from Europe who were able to bring their money over here safely, and they got lured into a bunch of bad investments. They crashed the economy on purpose, take all that money. The mid-30s, well, they squeezed the middle class, didn't they? By 1934, you weren't allowed to have gold in your house, right? A few little trinkets you could have, and maybe heirlooms and coins that were non-functional for currency. But everything else got stolen, taken off to Fort Knox, named after Philander Knox and not the Navy admiral they give you the bullshit line of. Most of the gold is shipped either to New York or overseas to our new owners of the 16th Amendment, right? But they want us to borrow. They want us to be in a big war. So they finance one Adolf Hitler. Regardless of what you think he did cause a big war over there. And we went in and spent a ton of money. Everybody did. We also spent a bunch of lives, right? As soon as that was over, boom, Korean War. Another bullshit war. It was not even a war, it was a police action. That's what they called it in the history books. As soon as that thing's over, 6 years pass, and boom. More than 6 years, but not much. We have Vietnam War. Fake Gulf of Tonkin incidents that never occurred. Put us in a war for 9 years. Scar the world with Vietnam vets that saw things they should never see. The Viet Cong, if nothing else, proved that they are one hell of an opponent, right? And then we had something called prosperity for about 15 years. Little skirmish in Iraq and Kuwait. Then we're pretty good again. The internet starts booming in the 90s. Whoever was a politician or a president anywhere in the world during the internet explosion did really, really well in the history books because they presided over an economic explosion due to a new invention called the HTTP protocol. But then 9/11 happens. And now we have an infinite war. President Trump has been in office less than 2 years, and ISIS is utterly crushed out of existence. John McCain was put to death for his involvement with ISIS at 4:28 p.m., just when Q said he'd be killed. Put to death for being a treasonistic criminal. That's why the military calls him No Name. But how was that all possible? Why did I just go through that little bit of history? Because memorizing and repeating allowed it to happen. But now it's a new world. 2018 is different. We now have at least 2 generations that have grown up inside of 9/11. Those that were born maybe 3 or 4 years old when it happened have no memory of existing prior to that moment, and so they've lived in a world of terror, going through airports and being groped based on more fake events that are only supported by people who memorize and repeat bullshit facts about why we have to take off our shoes, right? Consequently, I went to Australia recently, and I did not have to take off my belt. I did not have to take off my shoes. Did have to pull my computer out. After I landed, customs was it was a kiosk that I walked up to that took my picture, and I put my passport down, picture was taken, boom, green light, and I'm in. Amazing. There were no body scanners. There were just simple old door jamb metal detectors that you might find at a concert here in America, because that's all we really need. If you are awake, you will eventually get into a conversation. I'm sure most of you have done hundreds of these conversations, where you will bring your absolutely deep-rooted research into a conversation with people that you believe are honestly interested in debating the facts of a situation. But every time you wait for them to debate you back, what you hear is the memorizing and repeating stuff that the mass media gave them, that Time magazine gave them, that the New Yorker gave them, New York Times gave them, that some television show gave them. Because the memorizer and repeater has a character flaw, a person who's solely one of those individuals. They want to be on the winning team regardless of what it takes to be on the winning team. And it all boils down to a little methodology which is, am I smart? Am I intelligent? Well, again, as long as shows like Jeopardy stay on television, the world will be brainwashed into believing that smart is intelligent. Again, I'm just taking that word and rebranding it in this conversation, but you know what I mean. I don't want to say memorizer and repeater every single time I want to say something, but that's what those individuals are. But none of the people who memorize and repeat invent anything that you love in this world. Nothing, right? The gentleman that discovered electricity, all of them, Faraday, Volta, Ohm, Tesla, working up alternating current, even Edison, the douchebag, they were thinkers. Madame Curie, who discovered radiation through uranium bars, she was a thinker. She's pulling film out of a desk and developing it and finding out that there were big, giant, black, overexposed areas of the film because there was a uranium bar on top of it exposing the film through the envelope. She dies of cancer eventually from the uranium. Now, there's been a tremendous amount of research in the transformation of mankind talking in symbols, which is what we call iconic language, into phonetic language, and you hear me mention this all the time. But I have another analogy for you when it comes to intelligence versus being smart. When you can think of time packets in your brain, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, you become much more powerful in this world than anyone that is just thinking now, right? I have an analogy for the men. Any of you who've ever witnessed a boxing match, an MMA match, you have seen the guy that rushes into the fight. In his brain, and there's women that do this too, but mostly men, they rush into the fight too quickly and get knocked out. They wake up in the locker room. In their brain, it's a now moment. I'm going to punch you in the face, you're going to get knocked out, and that's it. But the Sugar Ray Leonard dude who steps back and uses intelligence and technique cleans their clock, right? They wait. They try to find the weaknesses. They try to find the methodology, because you can watch as many videotapes as you want, but in the ring, you start to say, oh, man, he's dropping his elbow right after he does that jab, and ba. Maybe he's one of those guys that flaunts and lowers their defense, sticks a chin out. Eventually, gets knocked out. Very quickly, usually. That's the difference between a mind that is intelligent and a mind that's smart. Now, there's been exceptions to the rule, of course, in some of these crazy matches where they put a sumo wrestler against some Kempo guy, and he runs across the room and bashes him in the temple 5 or 6 times, breaks his hand, but wins the fight. Hey, that guy knew that if he let a second pass, because he had played it out in his brain, that guy got a hold of him, grabbed him, and laid on him, it was over. So he had to shock his head out of existence by hitting him in the head as quick as he possibly could. Some of you know that fight, and it's amazing. I'm not sure what it's like to wake up with absolutely no intelligence, but there's a tremendous amount of young people that are waking up every day with none. There's a lot of baby boomers that are losing their minds because they're getting older, and they wake up with less and less faculties. Some of that due to age, some of that due to decades and decades of indoctrination, some of it's decades and decades of fluoride. For young people, it's vaccination regimens that they've had injected in them that just eat away the very mechanical mechanisms in their mind to think. And that's why, in my opinion, no parent has the right to inject their child with something that will affect them for a lifetime. Right? It's illegal to kill a child. So why isn't it illegal to kill their mind? Right? A lot of us are getting off of GMOs. We're getting off of fluoride. We're getting off of microwaves and artificial sweeteners. Why are we doing that? Because we're trying to protect our minds, our bodies. One, we don't want to get sick. But two, we want to be able to wake up and look at the facts of life and look at the new things that life has thrown at us and be able to strategize around it. I have a good friend of mine that is in sort of routine distress because he says, I can't understand what's wrong with these people. And what he's referring to is that he will present to them case after case of recent history, whether it be some fake false flag event or some election campaign, some Democratic Party and what they supposedly stand for. And he shows them the criminality of these individuals, their links to pedophilia, their links to sex cults, their links to savings and loan scandals, right? The Keating Five that McCain was all involved in. And he shows them the facts because he heard what he was supposed to memorize and repeat. And he went and he said, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Let me do some research. And of course, with a lot of the Anons who follow QAnon, again, QAnon could be fake, could be real. He did predict McCain's death to the very minute and day. We just had a senator accidentally admit on CNN that he was put to death because he was put to death. But he's having a problem understanding why when he gives them all the information that they need with pictures, pictorial proof of McCain meeting with ISIS members, with Paul Ryan meeting with ISIS members, taking selfies. Look up Paul Ryan, ISIS. Look up John McCain, ISIS. And you will see these fucking traitors developing an army to fight against us, to kill our soldiers and to kill our allies and to start shit in the Middle East. Okay? But these individuals that he is talking to through social media will not reply, will not dive down an inch into a rabbit hole. Now, part of that is a defense mechanism, obviously, because they don't want to wake up and find out that, one, they have to do something about it. But two, more importantly, their ego is in check because they are concerned that they have been had their whole life, which will take their smartness total and reduce it. You haven't been smart your whole life. You sure as hell haven't been intelligent your whole life. Now, some of that could be due to pure ignorance. Remember, there's the stupidity is you've been told the truth and you deny it. That makes you stupid. But some folks have never been told anything, and so they're ignorant. Sometimes ignorance is bliss because it doesn't hurt a soul and it makes your life better. There's a lot of truth to that. Right? There's a great analogy in the Bible for the difference between being smart with fake intelligence and being truly intelligent. It is the story of Christ feeding the people. They wanted him to duplicate fish magically in baskets so they could feed everyone who was starving. And he said, well, I might handle the first round just to get everybody satiated so you can think better and you lack your feral mind that you're in right now. But the very next step we're going to do is teach you how to fish. Because I'm not going to be here to feed all of you every single day. Get off your lazy asses and learn how to fish. And what did he have to do? He had to teach them how to be intelligent. You might know the rules of fishing. You cast out a net at a certain time of day, and you generally get so much fish in your net. But the seasons change. The conditions change. And you're going to have to be intelligent and go, well, it's not yielding as much fish as it did yesterday. Perhaps the fish have migrated. Oh, yeah, they do this thing called migrating. I noticed this because I have a mind that can think. I can deduce things. The guy down the way there, half a mile, came away with 2 times the fish that I had yesterday from this place that always supplies me at least 1 unit of fish. I know I'm beating that up, but you get the point. This has been something that has been tried and attempted to be driven into the consciousness of man to be independently powerful. And we've lost sight of it until the awakening, right? I mean, there's always been wonderful heroes out there trying to get you to think. Always. In every nation on earth, there's always been that person or persons. But sadly, they are squashed by those with, tenure professional tracks inside universities who want to learn one thing 40 years ago and carry that knowledge unaltered until they die, a very old person with a big fat-ass pension. Why was Stephen Hawking Why was Stephen Hawking celebrated so much? Because he took the old-ass theory of the Big Bang and blew the dust off and polished it up, and then with a bunch of other folks create a bunch of, because it was a flawed theory to begin with, so they create dark matter to fix it, and they just meandered on about it. But we have to give him credit for at least attempting to do something intelligent, even though he was categorically wrong about the universe. But it's going to take us 100 years to get that piece of shit theory out of man's mind. Now, does it really matter how the universe was created? It probably matters more how it operates second to second, so that we can figure out where we are, and if we want to travel to stars, how to do that, right? Now, the people that run the world are people that think. And that's what makes them better than anyone who doesn't think. It really does. Doesn't make them less evil. It just makes them more equipped to run the world. And they only hire people who think. Henry Kissinger is one of them. Zygmunt Brzezinski is one of them. Probably Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and a bunch of people I don't know in foreign countries. A bunch of no-name people that never get any credit for doing anything, but they still work to mastermind control of the world because they're thinking. And they really have no opponents except for those that are waking up today, which is why there's been this gigantic assault on all these conspiracy channels out there that are basically thinking day to day. Again, the QAnon movement is one of the most amazing things to ever occur in world history. Regardless if that guy is real or fake, and again, I think he's pretty legit given his John McCain prediction, okay? For those of you who don't know, he posted 30 days before John McCain died that he would die in 30 days at 4:28 p.m. Then we found out that a lot of his John McCain posts all happened at 4:28 p.m. You don't track time of death down to the minute unless you're being executed, okay? Even if someone blows their brains out, they generally aren't there to see it happen, and you're like, well, they died, between 12:30 and 1 o'clock, right? The Vegas shooter, the official report on his death was he died at 12:30 p.m. in the afternoon, way before the massacre occurred. A little bit of a official story that's kind of against the narrative, right? But we used to live in little communities, didn't we? We only knew about our little township. I've said this before. So we just worried about the flood that's coming in from last night's rain, the dam busted at the bridge, and now we got a big problem, out east of town. I watched the flood come into my hometown once. It's the weirdest thing because it's really, really slow, but it's very destructive. This little tiny wave on the street. I walked down from my house because my house was elevated enough it wasn't going to get hit by this, but I sat there and looked at this wave on the street that we usually use to exit north of town, and it was just ebbing back and forth half an inch. Every time it ebbed, it captured half an inch of the street, and it just kept going and going, and an hour later it's 10 foot up the street. Meanwhile, the houses that are down there in the deep are 4 feet underwater, 5 feet underwater, etc., right? But now we're in a global world because of the internet. And when you want to be a global citizen and you kind of find it interesting, or you just follow it because it's there, we all know that we get our picture of the world through mass media in almost 99% of the cases, unless you're awake. And then you get some of your knowledge from QAnon. You get some of your knowledge from one of the arteries that you like, one of the channels on YouTube that you like, maybe some podcasts that you enjoy, right? At all times, a good conspiracy channel and a good conspiracy leader will tell you, hey, don't believe what I say at all. I'm pointing you in a particular direction. I'm giving you the things that I read that made me believe that there was a conspiracy. One of the key things that you will see and experience the more that you wake up is this notion that people will accuse you that you're happy, that there are conspiracies that have existed in the past and ones that are going on right now and the ones that may end up turning on in the future. They think that you're happy, that things are upside down, when they're thrilled to death that their memorizing and repeating ritual has accepted all of these fake narratives, all this fake revisionistic history. They like that people died in these false flags. They want the children to be dead, right? That makes them feel good. Well, I memorized how many kids died. I feel better at night going to bed believing all this negative stuff. When your conspiracy person's going, hey, wait. Those were crisis actors in some cases. Not all cases. I think they really do kill people today. But there have been false flags in the past where no one died. Gulf of Tonkin, 2 naval conflicts with the Viet Cong that never occurred. It started the Vietnam War. How many people died in that war? How many people suffered mental problems, PTSD times 10 when they came home? Hundreds of thousands. How many foreign people die in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, because of these narratives that are handed down? Why you should hate someone, why you should support a war. Memorizers and repeaters that are directed by those that are the thinkers that run the world are the ones that enable all the evil to occur on this planet. And it's evil. If you were to be a mathematician and a spiritualist, and you would say, as a spiritualist, all I'm going to do is say, do no harm is the mechanism by which the world should be ruled. Those who do harm to others, especially for their benefit, or the benefit of their employers, are the evil ones. And those that do no harm are the good ones. You will find out 2 interesting facts. 99.9% of the world is good, but none of them run the world. The 1% are pure, disgusting, fucking evil. They are evil on levels that we have to struggle to fathom. The things that they do to children, the things they do to each other, and the things they do to us, right? So is it important to become intelligent? Well, to the degree that we can now say unequivocally that for decades, probably centuries and maybe even millennia, evil has run this planet. And it's not simply a misunderstanding of, well, the people just simply don't understand. They're too dumb to understand what's good for them. And so we have to do some hard things every once in a while to preserve the overall good bubble that is the 99%. It's not just that. Right? Wars for centuries have been waged simply to keep the attention off the leadership and to keep the people fighting each other. The Colosseum is over 2,018 years old, right? It's actually older than now. I think it was like 40 BC that, Titus Flavius launched the first Colosseum, somewhere in that realm, right? That was to make the people go to a sporting event, to be entertained, to satiate their internal anger with the way that their area was being run by the Roman Empire, and they could focus it vicariously on a gladiator killing a Christian or a lion ripping apart a person. Now it's just sports. Aggressive sports. It always blows my mind at the end of a football/soccer match how many of the citizens, the fans who like those teams, riot and fight and kill people in the streets after a game. Is that a mystery? Is that a mystery that this is satiating some primal anger in man? Because they have a shitty job, they have low income, their life isn't going the way that the picture book said, right? The fairy tale of life is a fairy tale. It's not true. Now, if we start thinking, if the snowball of awakeness, which I think is starting to reach a 50% mark, I've said that for a couple of years, I actually think that people waking up are starting to become very active in spreading their knowledge, because that's something that's like when you memorize and repeat, unless you're on Jeopardy, winning money for doing something. Maybe you're a dentist, you learned how teeth work. Maybe you're a brain surgeon, you learned how the brain works. I'm sure there's some hellish job satisfaction in that. But I think if you took a person 20 years into any one of those jobs, the dentists, which have one of the highest suicide rates in the world, I think even surpassing psychologists, well, now wait a minute. If memorizing and repeating and using that smart knowledge is so satisfying, then why do these people want to kill themselves? Now, there's a lot of deep psychology that roots in with each one of those professions, right? I talked to a dentist once and I said, why do you think there's such high suicide rates with dentists? And he said, because People blame us because they don't take care of their fucking teeth. And they hate us. They don't want to feel pain in their mouth, even though we've got all that solved, right? There's no reason for anyone to feel any pain anymore, regardless if we're pulling every single tooth out of their mouth and putting in implants. We can keep them out of that pain pocket for a lot of it. It may be embarrassing that they've neglected themselves and have to have dentures, but we have methods of even dealing with that psychology with the patient themselves, right? But I tell you, some of the happiest people I meet in this planet are inventors with maybe a lot of money and maybe no money. When you have smart knowledge that feeds the intelligent knowledge, you have a perfect balance. You have a perfect life. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter how much money. Obviously, you need enough money to pay your bills and take care of the things that you love in this world to at least a minimum critical mass, right? My friend Sid Mead, who's this amazing futuristic designer, he has worked on, thousands and thousands of projects, from movies to product design to car design, ship design, airliner jets, all this stuff, clothing, snowboards, watches, everything in the world. He learned how to be creative with his mind. He also has a tremendous amount of memorized facts about the world that he then gets creative with, right? He has lived a charmed life because of the mix between the two, and that's what each and every single one of us deserve. Now, for those of you who've seen the movie Matrix, you know that there's this funny part in the movie where they jam the wire in the back of Neo's neck and they upload to his mind, Kung Fu. They pull the thing out and he looks at the woman and he goes, "I know Kung Fu." Boom. He knows Kung Fu, and he knows it at a master's level, right? All right. The problem with this intelligence thing is that you don't have that mechanism. You've got to actually study. And so you might ask yourself, well, geez, I like this whole idea. Yeah, you're right. The people that confront me with their bad political policies, it's all about telling me what the mass media told them to believe. So they're not thinking. They're not doing any research. Well, I can't fix them because I can't put a wire in the back of their brain. But the other thing is you can't put it in your own brain. And so what you need to do is focus on what you love. Some of you love various conspiracy theories, and you go for it at a huge level, right? Some of you are addicted to the moon landings. Some of you are addicted to flat Earth. Some of you are addicted to UFOs. Some of you are addicted to the nitty-gritty of how to run capitalism in a country, how free trade should work. Whatever you love is where you should probably focus your intelligence, meaning your critical thinking and your questioning, right? The question mark is probably the single symbol that we could put forth that would be the symbol that starts this process of exploring your intelligence. Ask a question. Sometimes you're born with a very curious mind, and I'm not sure how that occurs. Maybe it's just a bunch of serendipitous things that happen to you as a child, and then you're just an inquisitive being. Sometimes it's that you've witnessed things become lies. And so you're like, well, it wasn't like they said. When I had my parents divorced at 9 years old, I was 9, and I think my dad was 32. My mom was 29, somewhere in there. Maybe 31, she's 29. And they got divorced, and I watched. They were very good friends after they divorced, by the way, so I was a very lucky child with that whole thing. I never felt like they disliked each other at all. They just couldn't agree on certain things. But I learned at 9 that my parents were still children, that they still had flaws. I don't mean they were babies. I mean, like infants, pouting or something. But you know that you have childish things about you that you would remove. I certainly have a whole collection of my own behaviors that I'm like, oh God, why did I just do that? Why did I tell that joke? Or why did I fly off the handle or something when I shouldn't have, right? That taught me at a really young age, things aren't the way they say they are. And I'll put it this way. My parents divorced because of pop culture coming out of the 70s. The indoctrination of women, the indoctrination of men, What men should focus on, the way that banking worked, the way that credit cards worked, the way that, the child was deprioritized in the name of the parent, was the reason why I ended up with no brothers or sisters and two parents that were divorced. So as I got older, I was like, wow, that actually ripped my family apart. But there's an interesting silver lining to that whole thing. My friends that grew up in their households with their parents and had plenty of brothers and sisters typically grew up very shallow, very maybe smart, maybe, right? Life was a book and a list of rules that you could follow. You just check things off. Got this, got married, got the house, blah, 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 got my debt, got my TRW rating. I got one boy, one girl, blah, 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 right? And they've lived blissful lives in most cases, and that's fantastic. I don't mean to take anything away from that. That's where ignorance is bliss, right? But I was being tossed around, several different schools, several different states. I moved to California at 17 by myself with no money. And so I had to, get my shit together fast. But I was always a scrapper, right? Where I lived, unless I lived in my hometown, which I think I only finished about 7 or 8 years in my hometown. The rest was spent in other cities before I got to, graduate and take control of my own life. I was enlightened by the process, because at all times, to survive and be happy, I had to figure out a way to see more. I was raising myself, I think, pretty much from the age of 9 up, maybe even before that. I've told you plenty of stories where I was in, Cub Scouts as a kid with no father, because he was working 2 jobs to try to pay for all the things that he wanted in life, because life said you should have all these things. You need all these things, right? It's an innocent mistake, and it's what society said to do, and every dude on every single block was exactly the same at that time, right? My father was not unique in any way. So when it came time to digest things like boom and bust cycles, to digest conspiracies that were brought to me by the people that maybe weren't directly involved, but they inherited some of the lies, like the moon landing. When I got debriefed as a kid, at 21 years old, that we didn't go to the moon by 2 guys from NASA who were as deep in NASA as you could possibly go, minus running the organization itself. It was one, I was not able to go through my full Kubler-Ross effect, right? So I wasn't able to completely accept it. But later, when Bart Sibrel made his video and echoed what they had said and put it in picture form and showed me the video evidence, I woke up very quickly. Because I've always had to look at things differently, because I didn't have someone spoon-feeding me money, spoon-feeding me, my resources in life, cars and shelter and education. None of it. I had to do it by myself. And a lot of you are just like me. Which is probably why you watch the show a little bit. That's your sign of intelligence. Most of the comments in the comment section on the YouTube channel, for those of you who are coming through iPod, they're brilliant people. And you don't have to appreciate everything that people say. I've seen some videos from listeners that are very different than me. They have different opinions about drugs than I do and drinking than I do. But they are at least analyzing their life. And for them, some of those regimens have been extremely empowering and enlightening for them. They've had things like alcohol expand their mind. I have not had that experience, right? But I've had acid expand my mind. And the amount of people that are fearless about getting, fall down drunk, angry drunk, but they're terrified of taking a hit of acid. It's interesting. Again, if you have a lot of skeletons in your closet, you probably shouldn't take it until you get some of those worked out, but it's interesting. Again, we're told things that are very destructive to our body are okay, or just a fact of life. Well, things that don't touch our body at all, except in the moment that it's flowing through our body, oh, those are super evil, and man, you should never take it. Why? Because they'll expand your mind. Drugs that expand your mind are the most illegal drugs on this planet, that leave nothing in your body once you're done with it. Oh, you'll be tired the next day, and you'll be again, if you take acid, your brain will be kind of really mellow for a few days, because you've exhausted a tremendous amount of chemicals in your mind. But you're done. And when you're done, you're done. And you can't really abuse it, because your mind will cancel it out the more you take it. I think most human beings, whether or not they realize it or not, want to be in control of their life. Even those that memorize and repeat are desperately trying to create a paradigm of existence that is, I go to work, I get this money, I bring it home, I pay this bill, and I live this life. I like watching football on this day, I like my Thanksgiving to look like this, my Christmas to look like that, and boom, I die. It's been a good life. And again, for a lot of folks, that works great. If they're satisfied, that's fine, as long as they don't contribute to the evil that is running this world. And today, it's pushing in. The evil camps are getting caught, and so they are trying to fight back at a level that is never been seen on planet Earth, except for maybe during inquisitions or super stages of tyranny in developed Europe, which is why America exists in the first place, right? It's interesting when I hear individuals talk about their country and all of the socialistic programs that control their lives. They can't do anything without citing the rules of their country. And then I sit there and I might mention, well, I prefer personally to control my life and to be left alone as much as possible. I don't like a bunch of state taxes on top of me to pay for a bunch of weird, palaces and the ruling politicians' lives, right? Because they're laundering my money into their systems. Slush funds and all kinds of weird pork belly spending, building bridges that don't need to be built, rebuilding highways that are brand new, filtering money into their husband or wife's foundations or businesses with no bid contracts, right? That's why governments get huge, because corruption is almost an absolute result of a big government. One interesting thing about the internet as a metaphor towards a country is that the internet has been built ever since the TCP/IP protocol was invented. And you don't need to know exactly how that works, except to say that when they first built a wired computer network in the United States of America through the military-industrial complex, they realized that if one of the cities got bombed, that everything that routed through that city was not going to get routed anymore. So one big chunk of the network could be cut off from the other chunk of the network, right? So East Coast could lose West Coast communication. And they thought, well, that's not a really good design. So they came up with this mechanism that was completely redundant. If one computer died, all the other computers could contribute to route the information around the damaged part of the network. You see this all the time. If a bunch of hubs go out in Los Angeles, we don't necessarily lose the internet, it just gets really, really slow. It's slow because all those packets are going through other computers that are already carrying the load of that particular region, so it gets overwhelmed and it takes longer to satiate your request for information if you bring up a web page, right? Well, a government is built like the old network. If one part goes out, the whole thing dies. And that's what's wrong with government. It's not redundant. The citizens of the world should be empowered to run their regions as they see fit, as long as they follow the do no harm principle, right? There's this weird notion that is almost like Catholic guilt, that if you don't want to be a globalist, you are a bad person. Meaning, if you're sitting in Los Angeles, you have to care about the kid in Cambodia. You have to. Even though there's very little you could ever do to affect that person's life, you're supposed to care. You're supposed to mourn. You're supposed to cry. You can't stop hurricanes around the world destroying areas. Sure, you can contribute some money here and there, but they're going to rebuild according to their specs, right? There's this notion of poverty in the world. It's very, very interesting. And when you talk to people in those regions who are from those regions, and thanks to Uber, you get to meet a tremendous amount of people from around the world. If you travel the world, you get to meet them face to face. But they will argue with me, and I'm never arguing with them, but they argue to me, I should say, that a lot of the poverty indexes in the world are bunk. They're wrong. And so I say, okay, I like where you're going with that. Explain. And they said, well, like I met a driver the other day that lived in the jungles of Vietnam. That's where he came from. And he was telling me that he was going to move back soon. But here he is driving. He was here in Southern California. And he was telling me, I said, well, what do you think about all this city stuff, this traffic and all the amenities that you might have in a big city? And he says, you know what, I don't need it, and neither does anyone where I come from. He said, we are happy as can be. And he goes, but when you take the amount of money that we make on a daily basis / monthly basis, it's nothing. He goes, I make that in a day here, driving my car. But he said, they're happier where they are, which is why I'm moving back. I have friends from China that tell me that the poverty index of how much money someone makes has nothing to do with their happiness and their fulfillment in life. They're not suffering. They have a standard that they've grown up with, and that's their standard. We think, my God, they don't have a 70-inch 4K HDR television. They are suffering so much. They don't have a fucking iPhone. So we have to force that on them, right? Again, what this man was sharing with me in the car was intelligence. He had been fed the propaganda of prosperity, but he used his intelligence to prorate that, right? I think in large part what he wasn't saying was that he was feeling his heart having changed since he joined modern society, right? What's the big thing that, first world countries use as a rationale to conduct wars all around the world? They say we are spreading democracy. That's what we're doing. Getting rid of communism. All right. Not a big fan of communism, trust me. It's a socialistic platform, right? I have never really met a communist that's super duper happy. But some of them do accept it, and they find a way to be happy within it. But in a lot of cases, what we do is we spread work and debt and taxes. The world is being transformed into a gigantic factory, right? I used to have a friend in Silicon Valley that used to pack up his things. He'd work for 2 years with his wife, and they'd save all their money, and they lived as destitute as they possibly could. Extremely intelligent people, okay? But they would leave, and they would move to an island. They had 4 or 5 islands that they liked in the Pacific, and they would live for 1 year at a time. They'd try to see how much they could get out of their money. I think the number that they would save up was around $60,000. So they put that in the bank. They moved to these islands, obviously consuming a little bit of the money to get there. But he said, my day is when I'm there throwing out a net, fishing until I had more food than I needed for that particular period of time in which that food would exist. I don't know how long fish would last. But he says, I sold the rest of the fish at the market, making more money to pay my rent. And they said that the last stint that they had, this was in the mid-90s when he was telling me this, the last stint they had, they actually chose to come home because of some family issues, people dying and getting sick. They would have stayed, but they had found a method of being fully sustainable in these islands. Now, one of the guys was a very tech-savvy guy, so I think he kind of feels the need to contribute back to the tech world. He doesn't want to lose all of his skills and, become unemployable when he comes back. So this ritual would end on his lack of, relevance in the industry that he was in. He was a programmer. The world needs help, doesn't it? It always needs help. This is not just a phase. If, again, we're ever able to rebuild society from the ground up with a good, righteous, do no harm methodology that is in place, we don't want it to be run by a globalistic socialism platform. We simply can't afford to let that happen because that is a contradictory method of living that the self has power. And the thing is again, like I've always made the analogy, every time a company ever gains a foothold on technology, they cease to create new technology, don't they? Microsoft they were comfortable with Microsoft Windows, and then they stopped innovating Windows. And then everybody who owns Windows, which is the majority of the world, was suffering. Well, Apple, under Steve Jobs' rebirth of the company, started experiencing new things that no one had ever experienced before. Microsoft wanted to deny that the internet existed. They were the last browser to exist, Explorer, right? Well, Chrome came eventually, but Apple, through Steve Jobs and his next operating system knowledge, had explored the internet and figured out all the interoperability and, office communication with enclosures and emails and all that stuff while everyone else was ignoring it, right? So a bunch of A-player intelligent people took us to the next level. Well, that's just in technology. We need A players playing every game that can be played on this planet, finding better zero-point energy systems, finding cures to cancer, killing cancer off altogether by not feeding us crappy food, by maybe not electrifying all of the air such that we are constantly bombarded all the time by things that manipulate the health of our blood, the health of our DNA. We see the benefit of communicating with each other using these devices. We see the benefit of perhaps a preference in food is, sweet or something that we shouldn't probably eat. But if we don't let the intelligent people prosper and become those intelligent people, then these things will continue to become unhealthy on every measurable metric of existence, right? Not just your health, but your intelligence, but your knowledge, your fulfillment in life. Maybe we become super intelligent and decide as an intelligent race to go backwards in time. To say, look, it looked pretty good in the 50s, didn't it? Everything was very simple. Everybody was very sweet to each other. We didn't have comedians going up and making pedophile jokes and getting paid to do it, so that a bunch of other people get desensitized to it, such that when politicians or CEOs get caught doing it, we're like, hey, well, that's just what some people do, right? There's a TED Talk that tries to cleanse pedophilia. Unbelievable. Aren't TED Talks supposed to be this aperture of all intelligence? You could fool me, man. I think you feel me, but I think this needed to be visited. The big thing I want you to take away from this is when you hear someone speak, especially in a debate of any kind where you're passionate about your side of the game, one, make sure that you're not just forming your opinion based on things that you've been told. If what you say back to another person is something you read out of a magazine, book, or something, well, you better have done your due diligence to make sure that what you're repeating is actually your opinion and that it actually works in the real world, right? Look for the Jeopardy people. People that just know the capital of Minnesota. But when you say, hey, gravity's still a phenomenon, for those of you who haven't discovered ether, what do you think about that? I don't know. I like Wikipedia. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It's got audio, video, locked Facebook group, Patreon page. I think that you guys are the right guys to tell. Spread the information. Give me a comment. Let me know what you think. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.